Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Saturday night slate of college football DFS for Week 5 of the 2024 season. That is Saturday, September 28th. We've got a nice little 8-game slate on DraftKings, which honestly has some pretty compelling games. And the way they did the salaries, I'm actually a big fan of. So we're going to dive deep into each game and tell you who you need to be looking at and targeting for your DFS lineups here on this Saturday night slate. Now, if you have not already, make sure you go check out our video for the main Saturday slate. You can scroll down in the channel feed on YouTube as well as on the audio to find that video. But we did release our preview for all 13 of those games. Went a little longer than I usually do, but it's kind of hard to condense a video when you're doing 13 games. So make sure you check that out if you have not already. But this is our breakdown for the night slate. Now, before I get started, I do want to mention that you should subscribe to the channel. That way you can be with us for the rest of the college football season, in addition to all of our NFL, golf, and college basketball content that we have as well. And then if these videos give you any help, please hit the like button. It really does help me out a ton when you guys do that. I cannot stress that enough. If you're listening on audio, hit rate and review for me. That really does help out a ton. All right, let's go ahead and end the intro there. We got 8 games to break down. Let's go ahead. All right, so the first game up on the night slate is going to be Iowa State taking on Houston. This would be a much better matchup in basketball than it is in football. Iowa State is currently 14-point favorites in this game with a game total of 43.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 29-15 in favor of the Cyclones. Iowa State's got an offense that's actually fairly targetable in DFS, though. You've got Rocco Becht at quarterback, who he's not he's not ever going to put up like 40 fantasy points. He's just not that type of guy. This is not that type of aggressive offense, and he's not really a runner. So he's just never going to give you a ceiling performance, but he has a pretty high floor. He's been over 18 fantasy points in each game this season, and one of those games was against Iowa. And now he's taking on Houston, where, he's only 6,300. If he just gets his 18 again, that's getting you pretty much 3 times value and doing it at a pretty cheap price tag. I have no problem with rolling him out on this slate. He's got a few stacking partners that we're going to talk about in a second. At the running back position, it has been just an absolute committee this year for Iowa State. You never really know who's going to go off. Abu Sama was supposed to be the guy in the backfield. He had some big-time breakthrough performances at the end of the season last year. Just has not really parlayed that into anything big yet this year. I don't mind taking a shot at him at only 4,800, but it's not a very strong case. At the wide receiver spot, this is what makes this Iowa State offense very targetable, is they pretty much only throw to 2 guys, Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. So the 2 of them combined, when you look at their game logs, average about 40 fantasy points a game. So if you were to play Becht and you were to play Noel and you were to play Higgins, and they actually play to their averages, you're getting big time value, right? Really, with just the 2 receivers, they are only 10.9K salary combined. So you're getting almost 4 times value if they just perform their season average. And there's a good chance that they perform better than their season average, because this Houston defense is not exactly all that great. It's really nice whenever we have an offense where we know exactly where the targets are going to go. Now, in terms of picking between Noel and Higgins, look, Higgins is on paper the more talented player, but Noel has always been the more productive player between the 2. So I think there's kind of a good balance between the 2. If you were asking me to pick one, I would pick Higgins just because he's a little bit cheaper. They also have tight end Ben Brahmer. Don't count him out. I think he's a guy that could have some big-time performances as we continue on with the rest of the season as well. Now, on the Houston side, this is just it's just not a great offense. They've been kind of a train wreck so far this season. Donovan Smith is the starting quarterback. He is the cheapest starting quarterback on the slate. However, there's a chance that he doesn't play the whole game. He has been pulled mid-game twice so far this season. Obviously they haven't made an official announcement that he's not going to start, but as of right now, he's the starter, and he was really good the last few seasons as Houston's starter. He just hasn't really done it this year. He had the one performance against Rice where he put up 25 fantasy points. He does run the ball quite a bit, but it hasn't really turned into much success this year. So, I don't know. You're banking on a big-time bounce-back performance from Smith and, for him to show us the form that he's had in the last 2 years, when that just hasn't been the case so far this season. It's probably a pass for me. And his backup, Zion Chris, if we would get the word that he was starting, I might have a little bit of interest at only 4,600. And, he's definitely a guy who's going to run. So maybe you could just see what he does at a really cheap salary. But I just can't get behind those Houston quarterbacks. I can't really get behind the Houston running backs either. It's a big-time committee. Rashawn Stanford appears to be the lead back for now, but he hasn't really done a whole lot with it. He hasn't scored double-digit fantasy points all season, hasn't scored a touchdown all season, so it's just really hard to back him. And then for the receivers, the starters are Manjack, Johnson, and Muse, but I think you can just avoid this offense. Next up, game number 2 is Stanford taking on Clemson, which does not feel like it should be a conference matchup, right? This feels like it should be a 7-10 matchup in the NCAA tournament in March. That's my second college basketball reference already this show. Anyway, Clemson is 21.5-point favorites in this game. The total is 57.5 points, meaning the projected total in this game is 39-18 in favor of the Tigers. For Stanford, they've got starting quarterback Ashton Daniels. He is mobile. He did have some big-time games last year. Hasn't really had one yet this year, but he's only 5,800. He's put up 3 times value for that salary in 2 games so far. And the Syracuse game could have very easily done so if he, A, didn't throw picks, B, finished drives in the red zone, or C, did a little bit more with his legs. He is going to run, and he's kind of the engine for this offense. So I don't mind a look at him at 5,800. I don't think it's the best play in the world, but I think that stacking this game is not the worst idea ever. And if you're going to stack it, he's a super cheap quarterback to stack it with. At the running back spot, it would have been nice if they would have told us beforehand, but Chris Davis Jr. was the lead back for them against Syracuse, kind of out of nowhere. 9 carries for 79 yards. I watched that game. He looked really good. He made an explosive run for 47 yards. He just looked like a complete running back. Definitely in my player pool because he's only $3,500. Ford and then Irvin were the other 2 guys that saw carries in that game. But right now, I think Chris Davis is the guy you want. Ford has been pretty serviceable this season because of his usage in the passing game. But it looks like Chris Davis is going to be the guy in this backfield. At the wide receiver spot, Stanford does have 2 target monsters as well. The first of which is Alec Ayamanor. He had 15 targets against Syracuse last week and 12 against TCU. Look, this is one of the best receivers in the country. He is going to play on Sundays. I know Clemson is a tough matchup, but receivers like this tend to still play pretty well against tough defenses because they're just still going to be more talented than the guy going across from him. I have no problem playing him at 6,300. I think he's one of the best wide receiver plays on the slate. And then you have after him Isaiah Cisse, who has played pretty well. His targets have gone up in 3 games. He had 6 targets in week 1 and then 8 and then 10 in the 3 games that he's played. Just off of volume alone, I don't think he's a terrible play. And he's definitely a guy that is probably going to be in my player pool because, like I said, I think this is a very sneaky game stack that you can get away with here on this slate. On the Clemson side, so they have had an offensive explosion in the last 2 weeks where they put up 66 against App State, 59 against NC State. And really, with Cade Klubnik, we know the pedigree. We know that he's talented. It's always been in there. And it just never really turned into anything at Clemson. Well, the last 2 weeks, it has. 50 and 33 fantasy points, average of about 42 per game between those 2 games. Obviously, he's a little more expensive now, 8,200, but man, he's got a high ceiling. He's running the ball now. I can't speak enough about how I think he's actually a really good play on this slate. And if you're going to pay up at the quarterback position, he's one of my favorite pay ups at the quarterback position. And really, like I said, he hadn't really done a whole lot at Clemson with a little over a year as a starter and hadn't showed us a whole lot, but maybe he finally gets it. Maybe he's finally developed. Maybe they finally put in place a system around him that's going to allow him to succeed. And maybe this is his breakout. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's still the same old Cade Klubnik. I don't know. But I'm certainly willing to give him a roll of the dice here on this slate. At the running back spot, Phil Maffa continues to be a great play. He only needed 7 carries against NC State to put up 24 fantasy points. That's just how good he is. And he's explosive when he has the ball in his hands. He's big enough to be a workhorse back. Stanford's defense, though, is pretty good against the run. They've surrendered less than 3 yards per carry against both of their FBS opponents so far this year. So I don't think this is the best matchup for Maffa, but you know that the workload is going to be there, and you know that he's a quality player. At the wide receiver position for Clemson, they've got 3 guys that I think are worth targeting. With Randall out and Brown questionable, that's really going to condense the snaps in this wide receiver room. And so you've got Brenningstool, the tight end, who's been great so far this season, averaging 14 fantasy points per game, largely because of the big 2-touchdown performance against App State. But he's going to be involved in the offense week in and week out. And then you've got the 2 receivers that play every down in Antonio Williams, who I think is their best receiver. And then the very talented freshman, Bryant Wesco. Wesco is more of a big play guy, as evidenced by what he did against App State, where he caught a 76-yard bomb for a touchdown. But really, with the injuries that they have in the receiver room, you know it's going to be one of those 3 guys. And so it makes Klubnik really easy to stack because all 3 of those guys are cheap. If you ask me to pick one, I would probably pick Antonio Williams. I think he has a little more upside than Brenningstool. And I think that the price tag being the same, I would rather have the guy with the higher ceiling. Next up, we have the game of the day, game of the weekend, honestly. Georgia heading to Tuscaloosa to take on Alabama. Georgia is 2-point favorites with a total of 48.5, meaning the projection is about 25-23 in favor of Georgia. I got to be honest, I kind of think the Dogs win this one big. Don't kill me. I think that the Dogs win this one by 2 touchdowns. I'm not a believer in this Alabama team yet. They failed to put teams away. Georgia is they've kind of been so far this season what they've been the last 4 years under Kirby Smart, where they will kind of lull you to sleep against these lower tier conference opponents and just kind of escape with wins, usually against Missouri that they do that against, not Kentucky. But I think they're the more talented team. I think they're the better team. And I think they are hungry for revenge after Alabama beat them last year in the SEC championship game, 27-24. And also they have the game day curse going in their favor. College Game Day, the host site has not won yet this season. Alabama, the host site of College Game Day this week. So I really think Georgia wins this game. I don't think it's going to be a super high scoring game, though. I think this is honestly not a good game to target in DFS, just being honest. Carson Beck, Georgia's quarterback, we know he's great. We know he's going to be a first-round pick. We know he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He's too expensive. He's $8,700, meaning he needs about 25, 26 fantasy points to pay off value. And I just don't think you're getting that against this Alabama defense. He's really only done it once this season against Tennessee Tech, and that was an FBS opponent where he accounted for 5 touchdowns. He's not going to account for 5 touchdowns in this game. He's not going to make my player pool here this week, even though, again, like I said, I can't speak enough about how good of an actual player he is. I just don't think he's a great DFS player when you look at the game environment and his price tag. At the running back spot, I do like Travis Etienne this week. I do think Georgia is going to have the advantage on the lines in this game. And Travis Etienne looks like he's going to be a workhorse. He had 19 carries against Kentucky in his first game of the year against FBS competition. He's the one guy on the Georgia side that I have the most interest in. At the wide receiver spot, I'm also going to play a little bit of Dominic Lovett. So previously, when you think about the Georgia passing game, for the last 3 years, they have had Brock Bowers, and then the last 2 years, Ladd McConkey's been a big part of it, right? And when those two guys were a big part of the passing game, everything in the passing game for Georgia is targeting the middle of the field. They don't really throw outside the numbers. They just don't do it very often. Everything's over the middle of the field. Lovett is that middle of the field guy. He's starting to turn into the new Ladd McConkey. He's not obviously the size or talent of Brock Bowers, but that's how they're using him in this offense, as a guy who's going to target the middle of the field, be in the right spot, catch the football, and get yards after the catch, right? Against Kentucky, he had 6 catches for 89 yards, led all Bulldogs in that game. If I'm going to play anybody in this Georgia receiver room, it is going to be Dominic Lovett, because after that, let's be honest, it's a big-time rotation. It's a whole lot of question marks on who's going to be productive. Now, on the Alabama side, they've got Jalen Milroe, who's like Carson Beck. He's great. I think the path for success in DFS is a little wider for Jalen Milroe because he is a runner. He's quite mobile. He scored 6 rushing touchdowns so far this season, which has led to his game log for the start of the season being really impressive, right? He's been over 27 fantasy points in every game. That would be absolutely a salary that would pay off his price tag, $9,100. I just don't see that happening against Georgia. Last year against Georgia, in a game where they put up 27 points, he only had 18 fantasy points in that game. Georgia's not going to let him run wild. Georgia's also probably not going to let him throw for 300 yards. So I just don't think this is the best spot for him. I would rather pay down for other quarterbacks than pay up for Milroe. Same goes for the Alabama running backs. Justice Haynes and Jim Miller, they're good players, but they're in a committee. And I'm not going to pay over $6,000 on DraftKings for a running back that is in a committee going up against Georgia. I'm sorry. I just think there's better plays out there than the two of them. At the wide receiver spot, it's where it gets interesting for Alabama. Ryan Williams is a 17-year-old freshman who is A, he's quite skinny, but B, he's also quite athletic. He kind of reminds me of when Robbie Anderson was breaking into the league with the Jets. That's kind of his build, what he reminds me of, just a really fast, really skinny guy. At $6,200, he's a big play waiting to happen, and if he breaks off a big play, he's going to pay off his salary. But I just don't like the chances of him breaking off a big play against the Georgia defense. I would rather play Jeremy Bernard, who is supposed to be the number 1 wide receiver in this offense, who is starting to get more and more involved as the season goes on. He would be the guy that I would rather play because I think he's less dependent on big plays and more likely to see more consistent volume. All right, that does it for the first 3 games. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's go ahead and break down the last. Now, before I continue, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I tweet out all updates for the show, as well as if there's ever any, kind of changing opinions that I have on some of these players as news rolls in, because I am recording this 2 days before kick. I try to get it out there on Twitter. I also tweet out the rundown before every DFS slate, where I just kind of hit the high notes for some of my favorite categorical plays. And I'm more than happy to, answer any lineup or start sit questions if you reach out to me on Twitter. So don't feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Basically, the Fantasy Corner Discord is a lot of really smart, really good people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. College football is one of them. We've had a lot of activity and a lot of winners in the chat here this year. So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, or just to people to sweat it out and have fun, talking about the sport with, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. And then also I do write an article to my Patreon for every college football DFS slate where I profile my core plays as well as why they're my core plays, taking into account X's and O's, ownership, lineup strategy, all that. I'm not just going to sit here and say that you can instantly win thousands of dollars by playing him. That's not how it works. But I do think you can get some information from somebody who's done a lot of research, has a lot of experience, knows the game, and help improve your process at college football DFS. All right, so let's go ahead and pick back up right where we left off with game number 4, which is going to be Illinois taking on Penn State. This one is an interesting one. Penn State is 19.5-point favorites with a total of 47.5 points. Lines courtesy of our friends at ESPN Bet, by the way. Penn State is projected to win this one 34-14. That's quite a lot on the Penn State side. It's quite not a lot on the Illinois side. On the Illinois side, they do have Luke Altmyer, he's been pretty good so far this season, honestly. He's had 3 games over 19 fantasy points. That will cut it at his salary, for being honest. He's thrown for multiple touchdowns in those 3 games as well. So pretty much, if he gets multiple touchdowns in this one, he's going to hit value. But with them only projected to score 14 points, that means you're going to need both of Illinois' touchdowns to come from Luke Altmyer. He will run the ball a little bit. I don't think this is the worst play in the world. Penn State's defense has looked inconsistent this year. They looked great against West Virginia, but they did not look good against Bowling Green. I'm kind of willing to roll the dice with Luke Altmyer in a small way. I mentioned here on the show before, I usually play a 20 max with 20 lineups. He is probably going to make 1 or 2 of my lineups, if I'm being honest. At the running back spot, it's starting to be more and more of a committee. Caden Fegan was the guy coming in this season that was supposed to be the workhorse, and he is a massive individual at the running back position. He's kind of like the great value version of Derrick Henry. But the problem is he's not seeing Derrick Henry volume. He only had 12 carries last week, and Josh McCray had 9. This is getting closer to a 50-50 split. I don't want any part of it going up against this Penn State defense. At the wide receiver spot, this is the good news with Illinois is they pretty much only throw to 2 guys. The bad news is they're kind of expensive. Pat Bryant is the guy that was the beneficiary last week, caught 5 passes for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns against Nebraska. He's had 3 games this year over 23 fantasy points. In all 3 of those games, he scored multiple touchdowns. I think he's a very logical stacking partner with Luke Altmyer. Zachary Franklin is another guy that sees a ton of targets. He just hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. I think he's a little bit more of a leverage stack with Luke Altmyer, and I think that he absolutely could, turn in a Pat Bryant type game. He just has to be the one that finds the end zone. With these 2 receivers, though, I got to be honest, they're very similar in profile to the Iowa State guys to me, and the Iowa State guys have a better matchup at cheaper price tags. So I don't think these guys are the best plays on the slate, but they're certainly not the worst plays on the slate. On the Penn State side, Drew Aller, I was very critical of him at the start of the season. He's been pretty good so far. 3 straight games over 21 fantasy points, peaking with 50 or 35 against Kent State, a game that they won 56-0. This is going to be the best defense he's played, though, and I think he's just too expensive. I would rather pay down for other quarterbacks than pay up for $8,500 for Drew Aller. I mean, really, you got to ask yourself, with Drew Aller, he's going to need about 26 fantasy points to hit value, right? So, what's more likely, Drew Aller to get 26, or even the guy in the same game as him, Luke Altmyer, to get 18, or Amari Daniels to get 17, or Rocco Beck to get 18? I just think it's more likely that you're going to get value out of other quarterbacks on this slate than Drew Aller at 8,500. At the running back position, here's where it gets real interesting for Penn State. They've had this 1-2 punch with Singleton and Allen for a few years now, both of whom are good players. Singleton has been significantly more productive this season than Allen, pretty much doubling his fantasy output. But the carries are almost 50-50. Last game, both Singleton and Allen saw 11 carries, and on the season, it is 37-35 in favor of Singleton. Now, while I do believe that Singleton is the more talented player, he's more likely to break off explosive plays, and his usage in the offense as a whole in the plays they call for him are a little bit better than Allen. I think there's some regression coming for Allen. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. He's still been a consistent, steady part of the offense, and I think he is a very solid running back value play at $4,200 on this slate. At the wide receiver position with Penn State, you've got some boomer bust guys like Harrison Wallace and Amari Evans have both had big games so far this year, but they've also been like non-existent in the other games. The most consistent target for Drew Allar is tight end Tyler Warren. If I were to want to play anybody for this Penn State game for consistency or for floor, it would be Tyler Warren. If you're looking for upside, you can take a shot at Wallace or Evans. Good luck figuring out which one it's going to be. Next up, we have Ohio State taking on Michigan State. This is going to be the most that Ohio State has been tested so far this year, but I say that kind of half serious because I don't think Michigan State is very good. Ohio State is 23.5-point favorites in this game with a game total of 48.5 points, meaning that the projected total is about 36-13 in favor of the Buckeyes. Now, Will Howard, their quarterback, to me is very reasonably priced. If Drew Allar or who was the other quarterback that I was saying was too expensive? Carson Beck or Jalen Milroe, if they were priced down here at 7,700 with Will Howard, they would be a lot more playable because you look at Will Howard's game log. They played 3 blowouts where he hasn't really been needed to throw the ball a ton, hasn't been asked to run a ton. In his time at Kansas State, he did have some rushing upside, and it's turned into still consistently 22 fantasy points per slate. That's about what he needs to hit value here on this one. I think that when you look at what this matchup presents to Ohio State, he should play the whole game. He should not leave the game early. He will probably be asked to throw further into the game than he has the previous 3 games, and he may use his legs because, a little bit more competition, right? He doesn't, they don't really feel the need to keep him on a pitch count anymore. So I think this is a pretty good spot that we can buy low on Will Howard, and we know this Ohio State offense under Ryan Day can score a lot of points. So I don't mind Will Howard at all at $7,700. At the running back spot, this is another situation not unsimilar to Alabama's where it is a committee and these 2 guys are too expensive to advocate for playing them. Now, Judkins would be the guy that I would play over Travion Henderson. Judkins has been just straight up better. Last game, it was 14 carries to 6 in favor of Judkins. Judkins had a long 86-yard touchdown run that really contributed to that. But I think Judkins is the more talented player. I think as the season goes on, we're going to see more and more for Judkins and less for Travion Henderson. But I still think 7,200 is a little rich for my blood here with Judkins, and there's other running backs on the slate I would rather play. At the wide receiver spot, you've got 2 guys that are playable, in my opinion, and they have very clear profiles. Jeremiah Smith, true freshman, looks like Julio Jones. I say this every chance I get. The guy just plays and looks like Julio Jones. It's crazy. He's a big play guy. He's not going to be super dependent on volume. He's going to be dependent on getting a big play to put up fantasy points. And he has so far in every game this season. He has caught at least a 45-yard or longer touchdown in every game so far this season. That's a wild stat. Emeka Egbuka is more of a volume guy. He's not going to get the super deep targets. He's going to get more of the short and intermediate targets. He's going to rack up PPR type numbers as opposed to just, catching bombs. So I think depending on what you think about each profile is going to determine what you want to play out of both of them. For me personally, I would be much more likely to stack Egbuka with Will Howard because Egbuka, if he's doing well, it means he's catching like 10 passes for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, which means that Will Howard is getting more and more passing volume, whereas I would be more likely to play Jeremiah Smith as a one-off because he only needs 1 or 2 plays to hit value, and really that doesn't mean that Will Howard has to have any sort of sustained success. On the Michigan State side, you've got Aiden Childs at quarterback, and I'm just not super interested in him. Like his game log kind of matches up with where his salary is. He's in this range with the Ashton Daniels, the Rocco Becks of the world at 6,400, but he's going up against Ohio State. He hasn't really been super consistent throwing the ball. It's probably a pass for me. At the running back spot, it's a committee. It's probably a pass for me. K'Ron Lynch-Adams has out-carried Nathan Carter, though. Last week it was 15-9 Lynch-Adams in favor of Carter, but still a committee against Ohio State. It's a pass. At the wide receiver spot, this is a more targetable position because of all the injuries that they have. If Nick Marsh and Antonio Gates Jr. do end up missing this game, then you're going to see a ton of volume go to Montorie Foster Jr. and Jerron Glover. And Montorie Foster's seen a ton of volume all season long. He's just only really turned it into one super good DFS game, and it's because that's the one game he scored a touchdown in. But if you know that you're going to get volume out of a guy that's only $4,300, I think that's a pretty solid play. Same deal with Glover down at $3,600. If you're going to get volume out of guys that are at that price tag, that's really how you can have guys have big games as value plays. Next up, we have got South Alabama taking on LSU. And y'all, this is not your everyday group of 5 team coming in to play a Power 4 team. It's not. Get that out of your head now. Right now, LSU is 22-point favorites. Yes, that sounds pretty typical, but the total is 65.5 points, meaning LSU is projected to win this game 44-22. This is the highest total on the slate. Let's talk about South Alabama. Gio Lopez is not your everyday G5 starting quarterback. He was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. He's got a cannon of an arm, and he's got an offensive-minded head coach and a young up-and-coming offensive coordinator that are going to play very fast, very aggressive, and give him plenty of opportunities to put up fancy points. He's $7,500, which is a very reasonable price tag considering he's put up 26 fancy points or more in every start that he's had so far this season. And oh, by the way, this LSU defense, yes, they're an SEC defense, but they're not very good. They let Lenore Sellers from South Carolina run all over them. I think Lopez has a ton of upside here, and I think this is a very stackable game. When you look at the price tags of how Lopez and the other guys in this game come in, you can very easily build a big-time game stack out of this game. And oh, by the way, Lopez does have rushing upside. He ran for over 100 yards against App State, ran for 62 yards against North Texas. At the running back spot, I've been critical in the past of South Alabama employing a committee at the running back position, but true freshman Fluff Bothwell appears to be the leader of the committee. He had 14 carries last game to Kentrell Bullock's 11. Worth noting that Braylon McReynolds did not play in that game, so those two guys were only splitting the carries two ways. But Bothwell has had a touchdown in every game so far this season, back-to-back games over 25 fantasy points. LSU is a defense that we have seen not be able to stop the run. They let Rocket Sanders of South Carolina run for well over 100 yards against them. I do think that this is a decent spot for Fluff. If you anticipate, like I do, that a lot of people are going to play Gio Lopez at quarterback, then Fluff Bothwell is a decent leverage play that you can play at the wide receiver or at the running back position. And then if he's the one that scores all the touchdowns and not Lopez, you've got yourself some true leverage there. At the wide receiver spot, it's one clear option, and it's Jamal Pritchett. So last year it was Colin Lacey for South Alabama that got all the targets. This year it is Jamal Pritchett. He is the number one wide receiver in this offense. He scored a touchdown in every game, and he's been over 16 fantasy points in every game. Cannot stress enough about how good of a play he is at $6,300, and he's a great stacking partner with Gio Lopez. You can also play him as a one-off play because I don't think he's dependent on Lopez's total in order to put up a high fantasy score. The other receivers in this offense are just kind of, as my students would say, they're kind of NPCs. Like they're just kind of there. But the offense is so good that every now and then they're going to have good fantasy performances. And so Devin Voisin, Jeremiah Webb, Sangren, Shamar Sangren, and DJ Thomas Jones, they're all going to play. They're all going to get catches. They never really have explosive games because those explosive games belong to Pritchett, but like they're super cheap stacking partners. And if you get something like a 5 for 70 stat line out of them, that's a big time play out of a value position. So I don't mind double stacking Gio Lopez with either of Watson, Webb, Sangren, or Thomas Jones. On the LSU side, they've got Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. And as much as I just typed up South Alabama's offense, pretend I'm doing the reverse of that to their defense. South Alabama's defense gave up 52 points to North Texas in week 1. It looked a little bit better against App State, but App State is kind of a mess right now. So I don't want to give them too much credit for that. But LSU should very easily hit their total of 44 points here in this game, which, by the way, that is the highest team total on the entire slate. If they get at 44 points, it's highly likely that they do it via the arm of Garrett Nussmeier. He is a pocket passer. He does not give you rushing upside, but he is certainly likely to throw for over 300 yards. He's certainly likely to throw for 3+ touchdowns. And at a salary of $7,900, that makes him very playable. I think he is quite likely to get 3 times value for his salary and really has the upside to go for 4 times value of his salary because of his ability to get you the 300-yard bonus on DraftKings and to get you multiple passing touchdowns with his team implied for 44 total points. Nussmeier is one of the top quarterback plays on the slate. At the running back spot, Josh Williams is kind of turning into the lead dog in this backfield. 13 carries last week, whereas Durham and Jackson had 6 apiece. But I got to be honest, this is a team that does not want to run the football. When you think back to last year when I was advocating for playing Logan Diggs in DFS, there were 2 reasons why. 1, it was providing you massive leverage on Jaden Daniels. But 2, he was the only running back that was playing. And so you knew that if an LSU running back was going to score a touchdown, it was going to be Logan Diggs. Well, guess what? That's not the case now. You don't know whether it's going to be Williams, Durham, or Jackson. The only good news is they're super cheap. I think Durham is the most talented of the group, and I would not mind taking a stab at playing Caden Durham, sub $4,000, to get a little bit of leverage on Nussmeier, but also just as a pure punt value play on a guy that I believe is really talented. At the wide receiver spot, this is where it's a real mess for LSU. So Kyron Lacy has been the target hog so far. He's had 3 good games and 1 poor one, if we're being honest. But he's still consistently leading in targets. He's still consistently scoring touchdowns, 5 touchdowns through 4 games. I think he is the guy you want to stack Nussmeier with. I do think he's a little on the pricey side. Like, I got to be honest, he's not Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas. Like, he's not Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. He's not that level of talent in this LSU receiver room, but he is the guy that they're throwing the ball to the most. So I do think it's a little bit more of a fragile path to fantasy points than obviously the hyper-talented former LSU receivers have, but he's still the guy this year, which is what we care about because we're in 2024. The rest of the receiving room has been pretty solid so far. Aaron Anderson has been clearly serving as the wide receiver 2. Last week, 8 targets, 6 catches, 75 yards, double-digit fantasy points in every game. I like Aaron Anderson a lot. CJ Daniels also plays a ton. Xavion Thomas plays a little bit. But there could be a big-time wrench thrown into it this week with Chris Hilton Jr., who is supposed to be one of the guys in this LSU receiver room. He was supposed to play last week and didn't for whatever reason. I don't know why. He's only $5,000. If he starts playing snaps, that's going to take away from somebody else, and that's going to really just throw a wrench into things. I would prefer to just, outside of Kyron Lacy, I would prefer to roll the dice on Mason Taylor. He's the tight end. He had 10 targets last week against UCLA. He's had 3 games out of 4 in double-digit fantasy points so far. He's consistently a part of this offense where if Hilton's active, I don't know if you can guarantee that the other guys are going to consistently be pieces in this offense. So it would go Lacy and then Taylor for me as stacking partners for Nussmeier. But like I said, this is a game where I want to get multiple pieces of. Even if you don't want to play both quarterbacks, I think you can get skill players from both sides of this game. Even if you're stacking another game with the quarterbacks, I think you can get players from this game still. I think this is the game environment that you want to target here on this Saturday night slate. 2 games left. Next up is going to be Cincinnati heading to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech. Texas Tech is 3-point favorites with a game total of 58.5 points, meaning the projected score is about 31-28 in favor of the Red Raiders. On the Cincinnati side, they're a very stackable offense for DFS purposes. Brennan Sorsby, the quarterback, he's pretty serviceable. I think he's very reasonably priced at $7,100. He will make my player pool. This is a good game to stack. I don't think he necessarily has like 40 fantasy point upside. He's not that guy, but he absolutely does have 25, 30 fantasy point upside in a game environment that can get crazy. At running back, it's a workhorse in Corey Kiner, which is what we like in DFS. We like playing a running back and knowing that he's going to be the guy getting the carries. And it's $6,000, very reasonably priced. Cam Scattaboo just ran all over Texas Tech last week. Love Corey Kiner at $6,000 even. And then at the wide receiver spot, they really only throw to one guy, and that's Xavier Henderson. He's been double-digit fantasy points every game. I think he's one of the top wide receiver options on the entire slate. I'm going to be playing him quite a ton, and I think that a Sorsby-Henderson stack makes a lot of sense. My second favorite pass catcher in this offense is Joe Royer. He is the tight end. He's consistently been the second most targeted player behind Henderson. He is only $3,600. That is too cheap. If you need to save salary, I think you can play him as a stacking partner or a one-off play and get some pretty good salary savings there. On the Texas Tech side, Baron Morton, he's a little on the pricey side, but this is a guy that when you think back to these Texas Tech quarterback rooms, they're always on their 5th quarterback by week 7. The guys that they have always get hurt. Baron Morton was always good when he was healthy, right? You think back, I think he's been there for 3 or 4 years now. He's always been good when he's healthy. This year he has 2 games over 30 fantasy points. Last week against Arizona State, they just didn't really have a whole lot of success targeting guys deep down the field. They were a very conservative short passing offense. He doesn't give you a whole lot of rushing upside, but I do think that there's a chance that he has a pretty big game. I just wish he were a little bit cheaper at $8,300. I think there's better points per dollar quarterback plays out there, but in terms of getting to this game as a game stack, he is going to make my player pool. At the running back position for Texas Tech, it is also a workhorse, probably the biggest workhorse on the slate, in Taj Brooks. And I got to be honest, if you were to tell me, hey, Mike, who's the running back on this slate most likely to lead the slate in scoring? It's Taj Brooks. It's an easy answer. Last week against Arizona State, he had 27 carries, got 117 yards, didn't even score a touchdown, and still got 17 fantasy points. He's gotten over 100 yards in every game this season. He is going to get the ball early and often. And Cincinnati got shredded by Desmond Reed of Pitt, both via the ground and the air. So I think this is a really good spot for Taj Brooks at $8,000. We mentioned all these salary saving options amongst, the cheap quarterbacks and the cheap wide receivers. If you're looking to pay up at running back, Brooks is the guy that I would be paying up with. On the wide receiver side for Texas Tech, Josh Kelly is their guy. He was their guy against Arizona State, caught 10 passes in that game, scored 24.9 fantasy points. He is very clearly the number one receiving option, but do not count out Coy Eakin. He's a high school teammate of Baron Morton who got off to a really strong start to the season, just hasn't really been able to sustain it, but he is a starter. He's going to play a ton of snaps. I don't mind him as a second stacking partner. And then Caleb Douglas at 3,700 is another consistent part of this offense, had 9 targets against Arizona State. I think you can get to any of those 3 wide receivers in this game if you want them as a stacking partner or as a one-off piece. Last game of the night. Do we have to? Like, really, do I have to? Can I just not? Fine. It's Florida State taking on SMU, and these are literally 2 of my least favorite teams to talk about, if I got to be honest. Currently, SMU is 6.5-point favorites. Game total is 48.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 27-21 in favor of the Mustangs. Boy, how the tides have turned on FSU this season. I think if you were to get the line on this in week 0, they would have been like at least double-digit favorites, right? Like this is really turned. Anyway, at the quarterback spot for FSU, it is DJ Uiagalelei. He's been dreadful so far this season, just dreadful. But he's $5,500 on this slate. They're projected to score 21 points. SMU defense just gave up 42 points to TCU, so this is not a good defense by any stretch of the imagination. But he hasn't played well. He just hasn't. So I have a tough time advocating for him. This offense has just been so anemic that it's really hard to advocate for playing anybody in this offense. There is one guy that I'm going to advocate for, though. I know I realize I just directly contradicted what I just said, but he's now in a situation where I think I can advocate for him, and that's Lawrence Toafili. So Toafili, in his time at Florida State, has always been a productive rusher, just always been a part of a committee, never gotten a ton of volume. Well, now Jalen Lucas is out. Roydell Williams is out. Lawrence Toafili is RB1. Last week, he took that role and ran with it, 17 carries, 80 yards, and a touchdown. Like I said, SMU's defense is nothing special. So $4,900, I think he's one of the better cheap running back options on the slate. I think really when you look at the slate as a whole, I don't think you can get a starting running back of the quality of Toafili and of the workload of Toafili any lower price than he is. So I actually think he is one of the best running back plays on the slate. Just know that there's not a whole lot of touchdown equity because I don't think this offense scores a whole lot of points. The wide receiver spot, Douglas had the big game against Cal. Benson had the big game against Memphis. This has just been a bad passing offense all season long. The only way I'm playing those 2 guys is if they're stacking partners with DJU. Now, on the SMU side, like I said, this is also a team I hate talking about. So their starting quarterback at the start of the season, Preston Stone, has been benched in favor of Kevin Jennings. Kevin Jennings is not as polished as a passer, but what he does do is run. But they don't even run him a lot. They don't even throw the ball a lot. He's not a quarterback I'm playing. I just can't get behind it. Yes, he's a runner. Yes, the team's projected to score 27 points, but they don't score fantasy points via their quarterback. They just don't, especially the way they're using him. They're basically using him as a handoff machine at this point. So hard pass. Now, the guy he's going to be handing off to, I'm very in on. So my problem with SMU last year and continuing into this year was the running back room featured 5 guys that were all a committee, and you never knew who was going to go off at any given time. Well, now 4 of those guys are hurt, and the only one left is Brashad Smith. He parlayed that against TCU into a game of 46 fantasy points where he scored 4 total touchdowns. Now that he's the only guy getting carries, he's very palatable as a play at $6,500. If there were other guys that were healthy, he would not be. But now that he's the only one left, $6,500 is a very reasonable price tag to pay for him because, like I said, they're just going to use Kevin Jennings to just hand off to Brashad Smith, and he is going to score a lot of fantasy points. At the wide receiver spot, you know what? I'm just not going to do it. They rotate receivers a ton. They're not a high-volume passing offense. They are overpriced. I'm not in on any of them. I still continue to bang the drum that Jordan Hudson is very talented. I continue to bang the drum that RJ Maryland is a very talented tight end, but this is a passing offense that I'm not going to be targeting here on this slate. Like I said, they rotate a lot of guys, which really narrows down the target trees. You never know who's going to score, and they're not passing the ball a whole lot anyway. It's just a hard pass for me on any of these pass catchers for SMU. All right, but that is going to do it for this Saturday night slate, y'all. We broke down all 8 games. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button. Please share it with friends also. Help spread the word. If you got other people in your life to play college football DFS, let them know what we got going on here. And really, just to help, let's help grow the community, right? I remember there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks, join the Fantasy Corner Discord, and get those articles on the Patreon page. But that is going to do it here for this slate, guys. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here quickly. I think I went a little long, partly because I was complaining about the FSU SMU game. So we're going to go ahead and get on out of here. Hopefully we gave you guys plenty of good information that's going to help you build your DFS lineups here on the Saturday night slate. Go check out the video for the main slate if you have not already. But thank you guys for watching and listening to this point. Best of luck to you guys on the Saturday night slate, and I will see you guys next.